The new door was there when I unlocked my apartment, a clean vertical seam cutting through peeling floral wallpaper, where no door had existed that morning. Suspicion pushed me back into the stairwell before I could reach the lock. My hands left grease on the worn brass of the key, while I listened for anything beyond the hallway. I work the late shift at the clinic. I get home after 2 in the morning, and I know every scrape and thump in this building. The seam smelled faintly of paint and something sweet I could not place. I did not stand in the hallway and wait. I opened my own door and watched the light from my apartment pool into the landing, then pulled the stairwell door closed behind me and went to inspect the new edge with a flashlight from my pocket. I am Alex Mercer. I live alone on the 3rd floor. I keep a cheap wristwatch with cracked glass and a thin ring on my right index finger. That ring tapped the seam twice as I probed the line where the wallpaper met new white paint. The paint was off, white but not the same off-white as the hall trim. There was a hairline ridge where a frame should have been, and at chest height, a smudge that read like a thumbprint. My suspicion hardened into a plan. Find someone who could prove this was real, not a trick I was playing on myself. I knocked on Mrs. Hargrove's door 3 apartments down and caught her in a robe, hair in a towel, staring like she had been expecting something to go wrong. Mrs. Hargrove, I said, there's a door in the landing. It wasn't there this morning. She stared at me and did not move at first. Alex, she said, you better call Diego. Her voice had a dry rustle, like paper. She reached for the chain anyway and opened the door a crack to follow me out. The chain rattled with the building's cracked pipes as we stepped into the dim corridor. Diego, the building super, came within half an hour because he owed me a favor after I told him about a broken heater last winter. He wore a work jacket with grease at the cuffs and a name patch stitched crookedly over the left breast. What do you want me to look at, Alex? He asked, and I could hear his impatience under the boiler room rumble of his voice. When Diego saw the seam, his mouth tightened. He ran a calloused finger along the paint edge, frowned, and reached for his phone to open a maintenance app. No orders for renovations, he said. He tapped a screen. No contractor listed. No permit. Can you pry it? I asked. Diego looked at me, then at the seam, then at the thumbprint. I don't pry anything without a work order. It's not supposed to be there, I said. My voice kept low. Someone put it in without telling anyone. Diego's lips thinned. He kept his hand on the seam and said, if it's new, it's the landlord's problem. I felt my mouth go dry. I put my flashlight beam along the edge and watched the paint absorb the light differently than the wallpaper, less scattering, as if the door's face had been sanded smooth. My hands clenched the flashlight until the metal bit into my palm. The door gave off a faint scent of disinfectant and the dry, warm smell of old paper. I told Diego that aloud. Diego frowned deeper and said, "You're saying it smells like books." "It smells like the closet where I used to keep my old notebooks," I said. Saying it made my throat tighten. I kept my fingers on the seam and felt a tiny vibration, like the building settling, but sharper, as if something on the other side had shifted its weight. Diego backed away enough to check his phone again. No records, he repeated. "I can seal it for now." "Don't seal it," I said too fast. My mouth felt brittle. "If you seal it, we won't know if it's an entry. If you seal it, it could trap." I stopped, because the sentence collapsed into nonsense. I had nothing to prove anything but what I smelled and the thumbprint and a memory that kept attracting itself to the edge of my mind. "Mrs. Hargrove stood on the landing and kept saying the name of a tenant who'd left 2 winters ago. "Thomas Caldwell," she said. "He did not leave properly." "Diego, Alex, I'm not opening my liability up." We argued. Diego's words were clipped. "Practical, Alex. Paperwork, landlord." "You tell him. You stand there and call paper." I shot back. "You saw it. There's a seam." Diego's hand went to his phone. I saw paint. "I can order a strip and patch right now, but I can't go making structural claims over a rumor." Mrs. Hargrove put both hands on the banister. "Diego, please, don't be like the others." Diego's jaw moved. "Fine. I'll take pictures." "That's it. I take pictures and I close it up. I asked you not to seal it." I felt the argument pull at the edges of my composure. My suspicion was the engine under it. I needed witnesses who would keep the seam open, not patch it over. Daigo's phone light caught the paint and washed the thumbprint out into a smear. Sam arrived an hour later because I called him, and his laugh sounded forced when the hallway light hit his chin. Sam is the one person who believes quick, odd things about me and then helps me make sense of them. He had a backpack and the squat pace of someone who works temp jobs and drinks coffee from paper cups. He put his palm on the seam with the casualness of a friend touching a bruise. "Open it, Sam." His voice was low and it had a dare in it. "If it's nonsense, I'll make you buy me breakfast." I looked at Daigo, who had his phone out. "You want to watch or call a contractor?" "Daigo, I want to see what's behind it, Sam." He looked at me, then at Daigo. "Open it, Alex." I slid my fingers under the flimsy latch and felt a give. The door swung inward and a breath of warm, dry air spilled into the hall. The smell hit me immediately. Lemon oil, baby powder, a curl of dust warmed by sunlight, my childhood bedroom wrapped in the scent of a summer afternoon when my mother left a lemon. Scented polish on a dressing table. My throat closed. Sam stepped forward and pushed with his shoulder. The room beyond the threshold was a full room, lit by a lamp that did not match anything in my apartment. It was a replica of my childhood bedroom down to a torn poster on the wall and a wooden train set in a corner. But the photograph on the bedside table was wrong. The boy in the photo looked like my brother at 7, but the angle of his smile was different, the freckle on his cheek in the other place. A small plastic rocket sat on the rug in a place I knew it had never been. Sam breathed out. "Alex, how I don't know," I said. My chest felt hollow. The light inside the room was warm and wrong. It reflected on a cracked mirror above a dresser, and the mirror showed my own hallway behind Sam. Then an extra figure standing in the mirror's far corner that I could not see from the doorway. Daigo took 2 photographs and said, "You re-getting the landlord on this?" "I'm logging it." Mrs. Hargrove kept her hand pressed over her mouth. "Thomas used to fix things," she said. "He liked to do strange carpentry." He kept to himself. Sam stepped in a little farther, his sneaker toe touching a braided rug that should not have been there. He crouched and picked up a torn page folded into a rectangle where a lamp cord would be. He read aloud the scrawled lines on it. A list of rules in handwriting I recognized when I turned the page and saw my own elementary school signature at the bottom. "Alex, Sam, this is your handwriting." I reached with my finger and touched the paper. The ink felt dry, but the edges had been creased recently. My stomach folded. I had kept that notebook in a green shoebox I left at my mother's house. That shoebox had been thrown out after she died. I told them that. My voice got thin. Daigo put his hand on my shoulder. "Alex, you say it's yours, and I take it to the landlord. We close the hole if it's a hazard." "No," I said, and the word came out steadier than I felt. "No, not yet." "Sam, what if it learns?" "What if it?" He didn't finish. The light behind us shifted. The door's surface seemed to absorb the corridor light and reflect less of it. It looked almost dull where the wallpaper around it kept a faint gloss. I stepped back by instinct. After they left, I sat on my couch and made a recording. My wristwatch clicked 4:12 a.m. into a new minute. I put my cheap recorder on the coffee table and spoke into it, because if I could pin the sequence of choices into something concrete, I might stay grounded. I described the seam, the thumbprint, the smell. I noted the torn notebook page and the way Sam's hand trembled briefly when he set it down. I said the word suspicion into the microphone again because the word directed me. Suspicion had been the reason I knocked on Mrs. Hargrove's door and the reason I did not let Daigo patch it over. I slept in fits on the couch, which is to say I did not sleep at all. When I woke at 7, there was a small rectangle of shadow on the wallpaper where the door had been, like the faint outline left when a picture is removed from a wall. The seam looked settled and ordinary in daylight. I kept my recorder rolling as I went to work. The recorder's tiny red light looked obscene against the couch cushion. That afternoon I went to the clinic on autopilot. I moved through intake, rerotted calls, and cleaned a blood spill from a countertop while my hand shook. At break I found Sam waiting on a bench near the trolley room, and he handed me a coffee in a paper cup. Alex, Sam, we need more than pictures. More how? I asked. We need to see if it responds. Daigo's voicemail hit my phone while we talked. He left a clipped message. The landlord was refusing to authorize any unusual work and suggested we call the housing board. If you seeing a problem, log it. Don't try to make it a spectacle. That night I brought my small notebook with the taped spine and sat on the floor in the hall with the door open a fraction. I left it ajar toward the hallway so that anyone could see the doorway existed. I marked a rule on the cardboard I found in my closet and taped it to the frame with duct tape. Do not bring strangers to the room. I wrote it with a felt pen in capital letters, and the pen rasped on the surface like a thin protest. The cardboard hung crookedly, a hasty sign pinned to a thing that had no business being there. My first emotion shift came while I waited. Suspicion gave way to anger. Anger pushed me out to the landing to confront Diego again, because I could not accept being told to log and move on. Diego met me at the top of the stairs with his large hands shoved in his pockets. We spoke fast. Diego, I said, you told me you'd keep it open. Alex, I said I'd take pictures, he said. That's what I did. You'd call the landlord, I said. You'd do something. Daigo's voice tightened. Alex, I have a building to manage. I can't leave a hole in the wall open for anyone. Open your eyes, I said. There's a paper with my handwriting inside. He looked at me like I had become a problem to be diffused. If you want me to act, get the landlord. I'm telling you, Diego. Don't patch it. You want me to defy the landlord. Do you want to defy a man who'll make it disappear? I said. The argument curled into accusation and then stalled when Mrs. Hargrove came out with a tea towel in her hands and planted herself on the landing. Diego, she said, you know what this building does. Diego sighed. Mrs. Hargrove, I'm not making decisions on rumor. You're making a decision right now, she said. You can help him. Diego looked at me, then at the seam, then at my taped rule, then at the tears in Mrs. Hargrove's eyes. He rubbed his thumb along the seam again like he could erase something with friction and said, I'll leave it unsealed tonight. I'll take the lock off the frame, but if anything happens, Alex, you tell me first. I agreed. The agreement felt like a bargain I had made with a man who could not see what I had seen and did not believe what I believed. My second emotion shift arrived after Sam left that night, and the hallway settled into a hush. Anger folded into a brittle, sudden fear. I found that when I left the door slightly ajar, it watched me with a hunger that made my palms sweat. The lamp in the room inside clicked in a pattern that sounded almost like breathing. I kept my hand on the doorknob and felt the vibration through the metal. At midnight I opened the door wide and stepped inside alone. The air was exactly warm. The rugs gave underfoot with the softened tread of someone who had walked them for years. The dresser drawer stuck the first time I pulled it, then slid open to reveal a stack of folded pajamas with a patch sewn inside that contained my mother's initials. My fingers fumbled against the cloth, and I smelled the lemon polish again in a clean line along the seam of a sock. I turned slowly because sound mattered, because every creak could be proof. The cracked mirror caught me and showed a version of my apartment behind my shoulder. The mirror's reflection held a pale figure sitting on a bed, my proportions, my haircut, but the way it hunched was wrong. It did not blink when I moved. My hand jerked toward the doorknob. My breath came shallow and fast. I heard the rasp of paper as if the figure were turning the pages of a notebook. I said aloud, "Who are you?" No mouth moved in the mirror. Only the turning of a page. I stepped closer until the wood floor warmed my soles, and the figure reached for me in the reflection with a hand that matched mine. The reflection's fingers paused on the cracked picture frame I had kept from childhood and then lingered there, tracing the freckle on the boy's cheek. I slammed the door and retreated into the hall. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might tear free. I used my shoulder to brace the wood and heard the latch click into place. Neighbors appeared within minutes. Mrs. Hargrove's voice cracked when she asked if I was all right. Diego stood with his phone pressed to the camera and a look in his face that had gone from reluctant to something like worry. "Alex, you good?" Sam from the stairwell. He looked pale under the stair light. I saw, I began and stopped because I could not make the steadiness in my voice match what I had seen. The reflected figure that moved independently. I felt exposed, ridiculous and raw. Mrs. Hargrove, Thomas Caldwell used to do mimic rooms. He did them with pictures and furniture. People left. Diego, landlord, still saying we patch it. He says no liability. He's sending a man on Monday. Don't let him in, I said. My voice had a flat edge. Don't let anyone change it. Diego rubbed his temple. Alex, we have to have the building safe. We can't have a hole that people treat like a living room. You don't understand, I said. It copies, it knows me. You know how that sounds, Diego. He used my name like a lever, and I felt myself buckle under it. I left the landing in the dawn with the recorded log in my pocket and the cardboard sign still flapping softly in the hallway draft. I taped another rule inside my notebook and wrote with more care. Do not open the door alone. Do not remember. The second line felt desperate. I could not tell whether I was writing a warning or a plea. The final scene of the chapter is a decision. I sit on the hallway floor and press the recorder to my mouth once more. I inventory facts out loud. I list the names of everyone who saw it. I name the landlord. I say Thomas Caldwell. I say Diego and Sam and Mrs. Hargrove. I describe the thumbprint and the lemon polish and the cracked mirror. I tell the recorder what I plan to do next, and I tape the log inside my small notebook with the notebook's own tape. Then I leave the door slightly ajar and walk downstairs to the street with my coat collar pulled up. On the sidewalk I pause and look up at the building. The entry light throws half the facade into shadow. I already know I will not get the landlord to believe me. I already know Diego will not disobey orders long. I already know Mrs. Hargrove will watch the landing every night. I also know that I have placed rules on the frame, because rules are the one thing the thing seems to respect. I step away and keep my back to the building until I reach the corner, and I do not look back until the overhead light blinks and the third floor window goes dark, a steady dot of domestic life disappearing. I tuck the taped notebook under my arm and walk toward the clinic, keeping my head down, the recorder's tiny red light a thin, steady star against my palm. The door was open when I pushed the stairwell door and stepped into the hallway. A warm lamp lit a painted toy chest and a crooked poster I had never owned. Suspicion rose in my throat the way a cuff comes on, sharp, involuntary, and I braced my palm against the peeling wallpaper where there had been only plaster that morning. I moved closer because I needed proof, not because I felt brave. The problem was now visible, and I had no one to tell except someone who could see it with me. I pulled the door wider with the flat of my hand. The hinges protested in a slow old creak. A small bed with a faded dinosaur quilt filled the room. A metal desk lamp threw a cone of yellow light on a shelf of plastic cars. The smell was dust and old laundry detergent. I said, "Jamie, get over here." I fumbled for my phone and typed 3 short messages because calling felt like an admission I couldn't erase. Jamie arrived 10 minutes later, breathless from the stair climb. She kept her coat on, hands jammed into pockets, eyes trying to catalog what she saw so she wouldn't have to name it out loud. "What do you mean it wasn't there this morning?" she asked, and her voice went thin. "What do you mean the wall was solid?" I pointed at the seam where the wallpaper met the frame and at the thumb-level smudge I did not remember making. My suspicion hardened into alarm when she stepped across the threshold and her mouth stopped in the middle of a word. "This is your room, Jamie, this is your stuff." She touched the quilt with 2 fingers and then recoiled. She spelled my name aloud, like testing letters on a fragile object. "Alex, this is wrong." Her voice trembled once and then steadied. I had unlocked my door earlier that afternoon and left it shut because I was going to make dinner, because I had a meeting over video at 8, because my life was mostly ordinary and predictable. The first chapter of this started with that simple fact, a seam cut into wallpaper where no seam belonged. I told Jamie that, the exact moment I had found the door the first time, without repeating the sentence that opened the whole story. I described unlocking, fumbling the key, listening for anything beyond the wall. She nodded, not because it made sense, but because she needed the map. We stood in a hallway lit by a single sodium bulb. The building smelled like elevator oil and the coffee shop downstairs. I watched Jamie move through the door like someone testing a bridge by foot. She ignored the lamp and walked straight to a bookshelf. There was a small notebook on a bedside table, taped at the spine. I remembered my own small notebook. It was battered and had my handwriting. Jamie picked it up with 2 hands. "Alex," she said, "this is your handwriting." She flipped to the first page and read aloud, slow and careful. "Left at 9:52. Thumbprint on the paint. Don't answer if she imitates your voice." Her eyes met mine. "You wrote this." Her mouth formed the sentence like a tool. "I did not write that entry," I answered. My voice came out tight. I reached for the notebook. Jamie held it away from me. "Then someone wrote it in your hand," she said, "or someone wrote it for you." She sounded clinical and angry at once. "Alex, look at the toys. Look at the desk lamp. These are things from when you were 8. You never told me about the car shaped like a rocket under your bed." She moved to the desk and tugged out a drawer. A model rocket sat inside, its paint flaked in the exact place my thumb usually chipped it when I played with it alone. "Mrs. Klein knocked before we could close anything. We froze. She was a small woman with a grey perm and a sharp voice that carried. She opened the stairwell door and stuck her head out, then stopped. When she saw the seam and the lamp, her face lost color. "It wasn't there this morning, Mrs. Klein. That wall was solid. I passed this landing 3 times. I looked right at it and it was just wallpaper." Her hands clutched the banister. My window reflected something wrong. I thought I was seeing double. "She my name, Alex. Please tell me you didn't put up some joke." I told her no. Marco, the superintendent, arrived 15 minutes later with a toolbox and a flashlight. He wore a stained cap and an air of someone used to solving problems by force. "I'll take a look," he said. And what he meant was he would measure, file, and fix. He ran his flashlight along the seam and then tried the lock we didn't own. The lock refused his key. The key caught and then slid as if the mechanism were colder than metal should be. Marco frowned and shoved the key harder. The key bent in his hand and he swore under his breath, "This is weird, Alex, Marco. I've been moving in fixtures for 20 years. Doors don't do this." His breath hit the lamp light, fogging it. He put a tape measure from frame to floor. The tape lengthened and then kinked where it should have hit wood. The measurement made no sense, and Marco let go of the tape like it had bitten him. Jamie kept reading pages from the notebook. Each entry referenced a small detail about me that I had never spoken to anyone. It described the way I folded the corner of a page. It described the scar on my eyebrow from falling in the alley behind my childhood house. An entry was dated the coming Tuesday and wrote, in my handwriting, that I would make a choice to close the door. A line later said someone would reach through. Alarm pushed the air from my lungs. My hands were damp. I moved to the threshold and pressed my palm flat against the paint where the notebook described the thumbprint. The paint felt colder than the wallpaper, denser. I heard a tiny creak from inside and the lamp swung 3 degrees as if a breeze had passed through the room. I said, "Jamie, get back." I could not say why I wanted her back. The word came out as a command without explanation. We argued then, loudly and quickly. "We done leave it alone. Jamie, we done let it do anything. We call someone who can handle this. We need proof first," I said. "We need to know what it is doing. Proof." "Your notebook predicts things, Alex. Then it's not proof. It's a trap." Marco stepped between us. "You both stop. You re-scaring the neighbors. I'll call the housing board." Mrs. Klein burst out. "Don't call them. You call anyone and they'll send paperwork and they'll tell you this is structural." She jabbed a finger at the seam. "They will say there's nothing here to see." The argument turned into an exchange of short, clipped lines. "Jamie, please." "No, Alex. Listen, Marco. Don't I know a guy. Don't call him." The words snapped like small branches. The back and forth lit a thin panic in my chest, a shift from suspicion to urgent protectiveness. I put my hand on Jamie's arm to steady her, and that physical touch made the decision for me. I pushed the door closed with my shoulder. The frame tightened around the jamb like a bite. The gap narrowed until only the edge of light leaked out. Then the jamb locked itself in a way that made the whole hallway shudder. Marco tried the key again. The key stuck fast and then slipped out with paint on the teeth. "It doesn't like being tested, Marco." He was quiet. He tapped the paint with the back of his fingernail and the nail came away smudged. "Where do you get this paint?" he asked. "It's old paint. Doesn't he match any of the walls in this building, Mrs. Klein? I told you the reflection was wrong. When I looked in my kitchen window, I saw someone sitting on the bed in that room. They were looking out the window." I thought it was me. Her voice broke, and she looked toward the door as if it could answer. We decided to step inside together and mark something that would prove or disprove claim. Jamie wanted to take the notebook back to her flat and photograph every page. Marco wanted to saw off the hinges. Mrs. Klein wanted to get the landlord. I said none of those options would stop it if it wanted to stay. My voice was low. "If it learns attention, it stays," I told them. "If it gets records of us, it keeps building itself around those records." I sounded like a man reciting rules, not a frightened tenant. Jamie opened the door slowly. The room rearranged around her shadow. The quilt's dinosaur seemed to shift its head to look at her. A stuffed rabbit sat on the pillow facing the door. Jamie swallowed. "Alex, the mirror has an extra person in it," she said. "There's someone sitting in the reflection behind me, and they're not in the room." She pointed at a cracked mirror above a dresser. In the mirror a shape that matched my height sat with its hands folded. But when Jamie looked over her shoulder, nothing was there. I stepped forward because I had to see. I caught my reflection in the glass. My face was the same, pale with tired hollows and the scar on my eyebrow, but the reflection's hands were tucked into its lap differently. Fingers interlaced in a way I never held them. The reflection's eyes looked like mirrors reflecting the room. A shift of understanding slid across me. The door didn't just copy objects, it copied posture. It copied habit. It copied the small, mechanical things that make a person recognizable. We found the notebook on the bedside table by accident. Jamie did not place it there. She had been holding it. The pages I had not read were now loose and creased. The next entry described a choice Jamie would make in the hallway, saying she would force the door wider. The entry used Jamie's name. My suspicion transformed into a cold clarity. If the book could write the immediate future, then standing here was giving it data. If it fed on recognition, then every glance, every touch, every spoken name became a recipe for more detail. I grabbed the notebook and read the line under Jamie's name. Jamie opens the drawer, finds rocket, laughs once, pulls back. I watched Jamie reach and stop. She laughed, a small, tight sound, and then she pulled her hand back from a drawer that had been there minutes ago. Her breathing hitched. Her voice broke. "How do you?" She did not finish the line. "Marco, we take it out. We pull it out of the frame and we burn it. We cut out the wall, we measure and catalog." He listed options like a man reciting items on a checklist. Each suggestion sounded less comforting than the last. I closed the notebook with my palm. "No," I said. "If we start tearing things up, we give it more to copy. If we burn it, we give it movement and smell to match. If we measure it, we tell it what numbers to be. The only thing I can think to try is to deny it recognition." My voice was steadier than I felt. "We leave now. We act like it never existed. We go away and refuse its attention." Jamie's face folded with doubt. "What if it follows?" she asked. There was a pause long enough for the lamp to tick. Then the door shifted inward, almost imperceptible, and a pale hand pressed against the inner edge so thin it looked like a cut out. The hand curled its fingers into the jamb, and the wood dimpled where the fingertips lay. Everyone jumped back. "Get back!" Mrs. Klein shouted. "Don't touch it." Her voice turned sharp and small at once. Marco's shoulders locked. Jamie whispered, "That hand doesn't belong to me." Jamie's eyes fixed on the hand, and I could see a new fear settle in her jaw. The hand flexed, and the knuckles made a slow knocking motion against the wood from the inside. It was the sound of a small knocking, 3 counts, then a pause. I grabbed Jamie's arm and pulled her away. "No," I said, "no one goes through. No one goes in." But Marco moved forward. He put his palm flat to the paint where the hand had left a faint smear. He tried to press the jam shut with his shoulder. The door resisted like something with intent. The jam strained and the paint scored his forearm. Marco swore and stepped back. The key in his pocket had bent. I shouted, "Jamie, do not step in." "Marco, stop." The words came in a rush of staccato breaths. We began the rapid exchange of lines again, this time sharper. "We can just leave it."
"Jamie, we can't force it."
I answered, "You want me to leave you alone with this?" "Marco, no, we need to watch it from the landing," I said. "We need to not look at it as something that belongs to us." I felt the shift from alarm to protective focus. That shift made me act. I took a cloth from my pocket and wrapped it over the jam smear. I traced a circle in the paint where the thumbprint should have been and left a faint ring with the edge of the cloth. When I looked up, the smear matched the circle exactly. There was a breath held in the hallway like someone cupped their hands and waited. Jamie stepped forward and then stopped. Her hand hovered near the doorknob and then dropped to her side. "Marco, we need to document. We need to get this to someone official." Mrs. Klein shook her head. "They'll say structural. They'll write a form. They won't see the hand." Her voice carried a tired certainty. "They won't believe it unless it takes someone." She looked at me and at Jamie. "Promise me you want to go through it." Promise. I promised, because words must be used when people are asked to take a risk. I promised and meant it. The notebook lay on the bedside table, pages fanned to a future line that read, "Alex etches a ring and walks away." I had not written that. I had etched the ring. My hand had left a thin scrape in the paint, and I could feel the warm tack of fresh fibers on my fingertips. The entry described the exact motion I had just made. That revelation landed like a second blow, changing the stakes. The door did not only anticipate, it could suggest actions and then mirror them. We left with the hallway echoing with small noises, soft scraping, a breath that was not ours. Marco shut the stairwell door behind him and promised he would come back with tools and a camera. He did not leave with the confidence he had arrived with. Mrs. Klein went to her apartment and refused to make tea for the rest of the night. Jamie walked me to my doorway and held my shoulder for a moment. "Alex, if you go in tomorrow, call me first," she said. "Don't go alone." Her tone was clipped by fear and by duty. The notebook remained on the bedside table when Marco and Jamie and Mrs. Klein had gone. I stood on the landing outside my own apartment and listened to the building settle. The lamp in the room behind the door hummed in a frequency that buzzed the soles of my feet through the floorboards. I could hear a faint, steady creak that had no source other than the hinge and the hand and perhaps something learning to keep time. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked back to the landing 3 times and peered through the crack. Once, when no one else watched, the hand pressed harder and a short knock sounded again, 3 beats with the same spacing. I tapped back in time without thinking and my knuckles met cold paint. The response came faster this time. The hand flexed and the room's lamp dipped. It learned the rhythm of attention. I took the notebook from the bedside table and slipped it into my jacket. I promised myself I would not read the pages that named me. I promised less to myself and more to the shape that had learned the motion of my hands. I walked away with the book under my arm and the knowledge that a decision had been made whether I wanted to participate or not. That knowledge was a small, heavy thing. In the hours after, I tried to imagine a way to remove the door's appetite for recognition. I replayed Marco's measurements, Mrs. Klein's reflection remark, Jamie's gasp at the mirror. I thought about burning the notebook, about photographing every item, about letting officials take over. Each plan folded under the same problem. Any action would feed it details. The door wanted to be understood. It wanted names to be said and gestures to be performed. It wanted to be opened. By dawn, I had settled into a course. Document in ways it couldn't copy, withdraw attention, and force a boundary where physical measures could hold. I thought about the ring I had etched on the paint. I imagined it as a boundary, a marker of refusal. The book's page that named my next action read, Alex leaves the ring and walks away. The door notes the ring. I left the ring because I wanted to see whether leaving would change anything. If the door recorded loss, then maybe absence taught it less than attention. When Marco returned in the daylight with a camera and a small crew from building management, we confronted the threshold again. He took 3 photos from the landing. Each photo showed the ring, the paint smear, the crescent of the jam pressed inward. The camera's flash flattened the lamp light, and the notebook's pages blurred into white. Marco's colleague took notes, and then stopped writing. They looked at the pictures, and then at the door, and said it was best we cordon the hall until an inspector could come. Inspector men from the city took measurements and photographs. They tapped the frame. They smelled and recorded, and finally left with a stack of forms that no one would sign with the correct words, structural anomaly. One of them wrote on a tablet and then erased, "We need to escalate," he said, and then added, "We can de-escalate without confirmation." Their words looped like hands shaking a rope. That night the door stood quiet for hours. The ring on the paint held the same thin smear I had left. When I checked again late and held my palm to the wood, there was a coldness that ran up my arm and made my throat tighten. I stayed on the landing until midnight and then came back to my apartment. I left the notebook on my kitchen table and set the light low. Before I went to bed I called Jamie. "Don't come over," I said. "Don't do anything. Just stay away tonight," she replied with a single broken sentence. "Call me if it moves." She hung up. I heard a breath against my door in the small hours. It sounded like someone drawing a sleeve across the jam. I stood and opened my door. The hallway lamp was burning. The seam was faintly visible in its light. There was no movement except a slight settling of paper and the far-off clank of the boiler. I closed my door and slid the deadbolt. I lay awake and counted the small noises of the building until dawn. When morning came, I found a thin white rectangle on my kitchen table where the notebook had been. It was a page that had not existed the night before. In my handwriting, neat and small, it read, "He left the ring." The door learned to match absence. He chose names carefully. He did not step through. The line ended with a date I did not recognize. I sat at my table and put my palms flat on the wood. My fingers trembled. I smelled old coffee and the faint chemical tang the door always carried. I had moved from suspicion to alarm to a focused, stubborn plan to deny it the thing it wanted. That plan had already shaped the room behind the threshold. The chapter closed not with an answer but with a choice still standing in the hallway. Someone had to decide whether to keep refusing the door or to answer it when it learned how to call my name. I set the notebook back on the table and left it open to a blank page. I taped the edges with clear tape. I told myself I would sleep and then wake and act with a fuller plan. The building carried on its morning business below. Footsteps passed, a radio clicked on. Mrs. Klein banged her cane against the stair. I walked back to the landing and pressed my palm to the ring. The paint left a faint crescent on my skin. The hand inside the room knocked once, soft, and then thrice, the same rhythm it had used before. I did not answer. The chapter ended with that knock, and I walked away with my resolve intact and the faint taste of metal on my tongue. Lina banged the door so hard the chain hit the frame. She yanked my arm and dragged me into the dim hallway before I had time to button my hoodie. Suspicion tightened my fingers around the brass key while she pointed without looking. "Alex, look." The plain door I had woken to that morning hung open, and inside was a lamp, a toy chest, and a crooked poster I had never owned. My throat went dry. The problem was clear. The door was not a prank. It was changing the apartment into things I recognized, and I had to know how far it would go. I kept my voice flat. "Lina, wait." "Don't open it." I said the words, but my sneakers were already on the warped floorboards. Lina let go of my sleeve and stepped back. I had called the super earlier in the day when I first found the seam in the wallpaper. That morning I had pressed my palm against the old plaster and left a smear of grease on the brass key. I remembered the exact way the hallway smelled then, sour paint and boiled coffee, and the sound of my own breathing as I listened for noise beyond the wall. Those details mattered now because they proved the seam had not always been a door. Marco arrived with a toolbox and a face that read like authority. He shoved past Lena and crouched at the frame. "Marco, don't touch it," I said. He didn't answer me at first. He touched the edge. The door reacted. A thin seam appeared along the veneer where there had been only smooth plaster the week before. A thumb-sized print showed at chest height. Marco froze and his jaw worked. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice low. The suspicion that had driven me since morning widened into alarm. I watched Marco's fingers hover instead of pry. His toolbox lay forgotten at his feet. Mara had shown up after I texted her. She moved through the doorway, and her eyes went to a small stuffed rabbit in the corner. "That rabbit," she said, and her voice sharpened. "I left that at your old place when we moved out. You remember." Mara's words cut through the room like a scalpel. "Lena, which Mara?" And then, "Mara, are you sure?" Mara reached and ran a thumb along the rabbit's ear. It smelled faintly of dust and something else, old marker ink. The rabbit's left eye was sewn in with green thread I had recognized from a summer I stayed at my grandmother's. The door did not contain random objects. It had chosen them. I stepped forward. The lamp on the painted toy chest threw a small circle of warm light. The poster on the wall showed a cartoon train I had loved as a child, but it had a figure in the window I did not recall. "Mara, Alex, stop." Her voice was thin. She stepped to my side and rubbed the back of her neck like she was trying to push a memory away. The suspicion in me hardened. I told them the exact moment I found the door earlier. The key scraped, the seam that wasn't a seam, the grease on brass. "Marco, you didn't live upstairs then?" I didn't correct him. The point was not where I had been that morning. The point was what had waited there when I returned. Lena's hands kept moving restless. "Someone's been inside." Marco looked at her. "No one could. This is building plaster." He set his toolbox down and produced a small pry bar. The sound of metal made my mouth feel hollow. Mara moved to the threshold and touched a toy soldier on the chest. "This was in your closet, Alex. I remember you hiding it behind your jackets. You left it after the fight with Jamie." The memory she named landed like a stone. My pulse picked up. I remembered the argument with Jamie. The jacket zip caught on the button. I remembered walking out with that toy soldier in my pocket. The door did not just copy objects, it copied specific events. Officer Ruiz arrived because Lina called the precinct. He stood in the hallway with his jacket on, breathing through his nose and keeping his weight to one leg. "Step back," he said quickly to Marco, Mara, and Lena. "Alex, you step aside too." He reached into his belt, not for a gun but for a flashlight and a pair of latex gloves. The latex snapped when he flexed his fingers and the sound calmed me for a second, the kind of detail that keeps you anchored. Officer Ruiz placed a gloved hand on the frame and the temperature changed. I felt cold come out of the doorway like someone had opened a freezer. He sucked air in and stepped by his widening. He started. He could not finish. Whatever pressure the threshold made pushed him a foot toward the stairwell, and he let go of the frame. At that moment the room reacted. The lamp flared and then dimmed. The stuffed rabbit's head turned a degree I had not set. Mara backed up with her hand over her mouth. Marco reached forward with the pry bar and the poster on the wall changed. The train's window now held Marco's face. Marco swore and dropped the bar. He stepped away and shoved his hand through his hair. "What is that?" he said. He sounded small in the hallway. That was the first time I understood the danger had a pattern. The door learned faces and then used them. We argued about calling someone who would seal the building. Marco's voice rose. "We call maintenance. We call the landlord. We lock it off." Mara answered him quickly. "Lock it off how, Marco? You saw what it did when you touched it." Marco and Mara's exchange sped up into a run of short lines. "Marco, we can leave it open." "Mara, we can push it either." "Marco, then what?" "Mara, we document it. We done touch." We record. Their voices collided and went quiet. The argument moved decisions among them. Marco wanted tools. Mara wanted proof. Lina wanted to call every neighbor. Officer Ruiz wanted to keep a perimeter. I stood in the middle and felt the suspicion shift toward responsibility. The decision I made would determine whether we contained whatever this was. I pulled my phone from my pocket and started recording. I said, I am logging this. I'm not leaving. The sentence felt like a tether. Marco shot a look at me. Alex, get back. Done T, go in there, hit. And then he said, if you step through, you'll... He cut himself off. The warning in his voice changed shape from rhetorical to real. The lamp swung in the doorway and the floorboards inside shifted, not in sound, but in a way my eyes could follow. The scuff on the chest moved 2 inches to the left. Marco swallowed and his jaw clenched. It reacts to attention, he said. Attention had been the rule all along. The door increased familiarity in response to our focus. When Mara named the rabbit, it oriented to her. When Marco touched the frame, it mimicked him. That pattern made the door a machine for recognition. It wanted to be known. It wanted to be opened. It wanted to keep being known. Mara stepped closer again, and I could see sweat on the tendon at the base of her thumb. Alex, this is not just about you. Remember when you found the seam this morning, you didn't open it then because you were afraid. You backed into the stairwell. Her sentence forced me to remember the grease on the brass key, the way my hands shook. The suspicion that had lived as a background hum in my chest turned into a cold decision. I needed to test it and stop it if I could. Officer Ruiz looked at me with practical eyes. If anyone goes through, you go with them, he said. We do not let it close behind you. We keep contact. The practicality in his voice gave me a plan. He put a gloved hand on my shoulder. The latex felt like a promise I had not asked for. I heard the building sold heater click once and then again. Small noises, precise, human. I moved. I stepped across the threshold. The world inside adjusted the way a stage changes flats between scenes. The toy chest sat where it had been in the hallway light. The poster hung crooked. The corridor beyond the room was not the apartment's back hall. It extended into a mirrored corridor lined with vinyl photographs in mismatched frames. Each frame held a photograph of a moment I could name. Me at a birthday where Mara smeared cake on my chin, me sitting on the stoop with Jamie's jacket over my knees, me leaving keys on a counter. The corridor smelled like the old laundromat where my mother worked. It smelled of coin metal and detergent. It smelled of a night 4 years ago when I had gotten off the bus with a damp jacket. At first I thought I could navigate it. I told myself it was a copy, a set built from fragments they had pulled from me. My body moved down the corridor and the photographs rearranged as I spoke. I said, "Stop." The photograph of me at the birthday shifted and now showed a hand, Marco's hand, resting on my shoulder. I said, "Marco, that's not your place." My voice echoed back, not quite my voice. The corridor tightened. My steps felt like they carried a weight I couldn't place. The first emotion shift came in the form of confusion to fear. I moved forward to take a photograph down, and my finger touched glass that was too warm. The warmth felt wrong. My knuckles scraped the frame and a sliver of paper fluttered free. Under the photograph was a note in a handwriting I knew. Open to stay. The letters were precise. I looked back, and the hallway behind me had a partial reflection of the real hallway, but the figure in it was not me. The figure had my hair, but its face tilted in a different angle, and its hands were not fidgeting the ring I wore. The corridor did something then that made me want to throw up. A photograph fell, revealing Marco's face below it, and in the frame behind Marco's face was a photograph of the building, a stairwell where we first saw the seam. I felt my breath shallow. My hand shook. I had to anchor with facts. I found a door along the mirrored corridor with a brass knob like the one I owned. I twisted it, and the door opened onto a narrow room that smelled like the apartment I had grown up in. Peanut butter on the counter, a waxy red candle on the mantel, a stack of tapes labeled in black marker. A child's drawing hung crooked on the fridge. My stomach dropped. The door had assembled an interior from named moments. Someone called my name from the threshold. "Alex!" Mara shouted. Her voice sounded distant but correct. She stepped into the corridor and her face bled into worry. "Alex, get back here," I said. "Mara, don't touch anything." I'm not going to. "I'm going to pull him back." Mara's short lines were quick, a string of commands. She did not look like a friend ready to give up. She looked like someone who believed she could force a problem to stop. I said. This corridor is rearranging to hold me. It tried to copy Marco and it put his face in a photograph. It wants people inside it to be replaced by those images. Mara stepped closer and reached for my wrist. Her fingers closed around my thin silver ring. She pulled. The ring felt heavy in her palm. The corridor responded. A photograph of Mara at the laundromat slid half off its backing, and its image now matched her exact expression. She started, eyes flicking to the frame. It just copied my look. She whispered, "Alex, it knows us." There was fear now, but also determination. The second emotion shift moved from fear to resolve. We needed action that was precise. Officer Ruiz's voice came muffled down the corridor behind us. "Keep your hands visible." "Marco, stay at the threshold." Marco obeyed, and he held the pry bar like a ward. He kept repeating the same short sentence. "It doesn't take everything at once." He looked stricken. He kept glancing at the photograph with his face in it, and then back at the real world. "If it can put me there, it can put someone out there," he said. I made a choice. I would test the principle of substitution and try to force the door to reverse. I said, "Marco, I want you to step all the way in and then come back out. Do it slow." We reckoned. "We hold contact." Marco's mouth opened. "I am not," he started. Mara cut him off. "Marco, do it. If it learns us, maybe it reverses. If it can to choose." The back and forth was quick. Marco's voice tightened. "We are not. Then we are not leaving it alone." Mara countered. "We are not letting it decide." That rapid exchange, 3 lines, became a hinge in the hallway. Marco stepped forward at last, feet careful on the linoleum that wasn't linoleum. He crossed the threshold and his shoulders tensed. The corridor's photos adjusted as he moved. Officer Ruiz watched with a hand near his radio. Lina had taken a step back and was crying under her breath. I heard her say, "Please, Marco." When Marco reached the photograph with his face, it slid aside, and beneath it, it was a photograph of the stairwell where the seam first appeared. Marco staggered and reached for the pry bar as if to anchor himself. Then, without warning, he went still. His mouth closed. His eyes blinked, and then he wasn't blinking at all. He turned his head toward me, and the expression in his face matched the photograph exactly. For a second I couldn't tell whether the stillness belonged to Marco or the photograph. I lunged and grabbed Marco's shoulders. He did not respond. The corridor hummed with a low pressure and the air tasted metallic. I shouted, "Marco!" My voice broke. Officer Ruiz rushed forward and took hold of Marco from behind. He tried to pull him back. The officer's glove slipped on Marco's jacket, and then the glove came away, leaving a smear of pale dust on the fabric. The photograph of Marco wavered and a corner of it fell forward. When the corner hit the floor, it left a tiny smear of something dark. Then Marco blinked and sat back on his heels, his eyes focused on me, and he coughed. I was cold. I felt cold. I couldn't move. I thought. His sentence broke apart. He looked at his hands and then at us. "What happened, Marco?" His voice had regained its cadence, but his left hand had a smear of paper dust on the knuckle. Mara grabbed his wrist and stared at the dust. "Where did that come from?" "That's from the photograph. That came from the frame." With the kind of clarity that made everyone quiet. Something had tried to take Marco. It had tried to substitute him with the image it preferred. It had failed, but it had left a mark. The mark changed how we weighed risk. We could not assume it simply copied objects anymore. It could reach back into someone's body, press on them, and pull. Marco's face had been mirrored in the photograph, and for a heartbeat his body answered to the mirror instead of to us. The mid-chapter cliffhanger hit when the corridor flickered and a new photograph slid into place. The photograph showed the hallway outside our building, but in it, the stairwell had a figure standing where nobody in the real world was. A shape that matched Marco's jacket was visible, but its head turned toward the camera, and its mouth was open in a silent shape. I heard Mara say, "That's not a photograph, it's a plan." Her whisper carried like a verdict. We argued then, fast and sharp. "We call the department. We get hazmat. Lina, we don't leave it open." Marco repeated. "We close it, Officer Ruiz." Mara shook her head. "Closing might trap someone inside. We have to force it to give back what it copied." They spoke over each other in short lines. The disagreement flowed into quick commands and counters. The total of their voices formed a strategy: keep the corridor occupied, maintain contact, and force a reversal. I decided to go deeper because I had been the constant the door adapted to since morning. I would go where it pulled most. I put my hand on the photograph of the stairwell and felt the paper warmth. I pressed my palm hard to it and said, "Give them back." The words sounded useless in the corridor, but I said them anyway. The photograph buzzed where my hand touched it, and the corridor reacted. A photograph fell face down, and when I bent to pick it up, I saw a picture of Marco on the floor, but his face was wrong. His mouth was closed and his eyes were turned toward where I stood. The corridor tightened like a fist around an image. Then, something I hadn't expected happened. The corridor began to shrink, not slowly. The walls leaned inward by inches. My ears started to ring. Mara shouted, "Alex, come back!" Officer Ruiz reached a gloved hand and his fingers brushed my elbow. The sensation of his glove on my sleeve felt like a lifeline. The corridor's photographs flipped like pages in a book, each one showing an incremental substitution. The pressure increased in my chest. My breathing got shallow. I grabbed for a photograph to stop the sequence and my hand closed on glass. The climax was an act of decision more than a battle. I pulled my hand free and crossed my arms and did the only thing I could imagine. I walked toward the end of the corridor and refused to let the photographs align me with them. I said names out loud: Marco, Mara, Lina, Ruiz, and I spoke dates, exact moments, the names of streets, and the color of Jamie's jacket. Every detail I named made the photograph shiver and in some cases, to my relief, slide back. There was a cost. The corridor tightened, and I felt the pull like someone trying to pull a sweater off my shoulders slowly. Then the corridor did the one thing none of us expected. It matched me precisely. A photograph fell and revealed my face under a child's birthday hat, grinning with frosting on my chin. Beside it, another photograph showed Marco with a look of sleep. The corridor's last action before breaking was to set a small, pale hand on the edge of the frame. The same hand in the photo that would later appear on the other side of the final door. It was a gesture that promised replacement, not injury. I shouted, "Stop!" And in the real hallway a sound like a board snapping echoed. The corridor folded inward, and I stumbled back out into the apartment hallway. I hit the warped floor and tasted metal. Officer Ruiz caught me and pulled at my shoulders. Mara came around and hugged me hard for a beat, then stepped away, eyes raw. Marco sat on the stair and ran his hands through his hair, staring at the smear on his knuckle. Lina leaned against the opposite wall and pressed her palms to her cheeks. We counted heads. No one was missing. The officer ran his hand along the frame, where the dimension had been, and the veneer felt like ordinary paint. Then, in the plaster next to the door, a faint rectangular outline glowed for a heartbeat. A thumbprint sat at chest height where the door had been. The outline pulsed once, thinly, like a withheld exhale, and then the light faded. The apartment's heater clicked. The hallway lamp hummed the same single note. The aftermath was practical and quiet. We agreed not to tell everyone. Marco, we document it. We keep it out of a press cycle until we know what it does. Mara argued for a different tack. We tell someone who will actually look. We don't play bureaucrat. They went back and forth in short lines and then they calmed. Officer Ruiz radioed his dispatch and said, "We secured a perimeter." No public alarm. He did not press the issue more than that. There was a tension between secrecy and safety that none of us resolved fully, but we reached a temporary pact. We would log what happened, keep the building closed to strangers, and not volunteer the detail that the door could rearrange faces. Before we left, I recorded a terse warning on my phone. I said exactly what happened. The date, the hour, who was present, and that the door had attempted to substitute Marco and had left a paper smear on his knuckle. I attached the footage from when Marco stepped through and when the photograph shifted. Marco watched me do it and said, "Alex, you're doing the right thing. Keep that safe." He did not say how safe meant what. We stood in the hallway and the final scene played out in small, exact motions. The outline in the wallpaper shimmered once more and a faint thread of light seemed to move behind the plaster. Marco took his toolbox, shoulders slumped. Mara folded her arms and looked at me like she wanted to ask more but didn't. Officer Ruiz checked his gloves and said, "I don't know what that is, but I am not touching it again." Lina squeezed my hand and then unclenched. We keep quiet. For now, I pressed my palm to the faint rectangular outline. The plaster felt cold. The thumbprint at chest height left a residue that smelled like old books and disinfectant. I recorded one last line on my phone. "If anyone finds this, don't touch the outline. Don't let it learn you. Burn the tape if it gets close." I said it plainly and then clipped the phone into my pocket. The suspicion that had driven me at the start of the night had shifted twice, first into fear when Marco froze, then into a brittle, purposeful resolve to document and contain. We left the building in a quiet column. Officer Ruiz stood at the landing for a moment and then turned to go. Marco to him, "Call me if anything else moves." Marco's voice was steady again, but there was a rawness under it. Mara hugged me once briefly and said, "You kept your hand steady." "Thank you." Lina touched my shoulder and didn't say anything. We agreed on nothing formal, and yet an unspoken plan hung between us. Keep a perimeter, share evidence only with someone who would act, and keep the door's existence from the public. When I reached the stairwell, I looked back once. The wallpaper held a faint, rectangular outline, and the thumbprint glittered slightly in the stairwell light. It was a small, physical fact I could point to and remember. I slotted the memory into the notebook I carried. The final concrete beat of the night was simple. The outline pulsed once more, not loud or dramatic, just a single thin pulse that moved through the plaster like a thumb across a breathing glass. Then it dimmed and the hallway returned to its usual hum. I recorded everything into the file I labeled in my thin handwriting. I wrote the names. Lina, Marco, Mara, Ruiz. I wrote the sequence of events with times down to the minute. I described the thumbprint in pencil strokes and the rust fleck in the door's chipped paint. I did not write my feelings in general terms. I wrote the exact way my hand shook and the exact taste of metal in my mouth when I stumbled out. The chapter ends not with a statement about destiny or a promise of change, but with a concrete action. I sealed the files in a small metal box, slid the box into the deep of my closet under the winter coat, and locked it. The outline in the wallpaper remained faint and patient, and I left the building with the knowledge that the door had learned to imitate us and almost replace one of us. The door was gone. The thumbprint remained. The box clicked shut and my hand left a slight smear on the metal lid.